So, thank you all for joining us. We are so happy to have you do a deep dive on data centers with OHM. So, this issue investigation is the first in a series on data centers in coastal Georgia. For this specific one, we will be kind of diving into site and scale and kind of giving that base of knowledge for what data centers are, what they look like, and how they might impact coastal Georgia. We are super, super excited to be meeting y'all online, but of course, do value in-person meetings as well. So there at the end will be an option to reach out if you have any questions or like to have an in-person meeting. I am available and you can reach out through a link. Awesome. So our agenda for today is a general welcome. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to introduce OHM 100 Miles, talk about who we are and what we do. I'm sure many of you are familiar with us, but many might be new. We're going to introduce our presenters, and that's going to be exciting because we got a real expert in the room here today. And we're going to do a broad data center overview, some frequently asked questions, kind of drive some dialogue that way. We'll talk about our coastal concerns about siting and scale. We'll talking about kind of the upcoming webinar content. This is a 4 webinar series all about data centers. And so we'll talk about what those topics we'll cover will be as we move forward. We'll talk about some conclusions, broad conclusions we have, um, some actions that you have, and some resources that we've created for you, and then do that Q&A as I mentioned before. So that's the agenda for today. Very excited you all are here and joining us, and very excited for those of you that are able to ask questions, be thinking about those and dropping them into the Q&A on Zoom. So this is me. I'm the Advocacy Education Coordinator for 100 Miles. I've been working at OHM for almost 2 years now. Data centers has been a thing I've been talking about ever since I started. So it is a big topic. I have a background in informal education and outdoor education and have been kind of teaching people in the outdoors, about the environment, and threats to it for my whole career. So excited to talk about data centers with you all. I'd also like to introduce Hannah Salvaggio. She is an AICP, which means that she has a really, really certification that as a planner that is nationally recognized. It's one of the only nationally recognized brands that allows her to have this really broad knowledge of planning and how communities are laid out, how cities are laid out, how we approach planning around development. And she brings amazing lens to our team broadly, but also to data centers. And we're going to talk about some of the um, things that as a program team, as an organization, we've been talking a lot about when it comes to data centers, as Hannah has been running point on this issue. Um, yeah, it's a big job. We appreciate her for that. And then broadly, who is OHM? What are we? So we are a team led by 17 staff members. We are, 100 miles, which represents the 100 miles of the Georgia coast. We work to help residents and visitors better understand critical issues like data centers that are facing our coast and how to take action to protect it. So we like to say that we wear lots of different hats. So we're advocates, we're organizers, we're educators, we're community planners, we're naturalists, we're strategists, we're conservationists, but above all, we're conservationists and we have a tie to the land and this environment and this coast, and we love it. So that is kind of who we are. And what we do is we try to protect the 100 miles of the Georgia coast forever. And we do that kind of through three pillars of advocacy, of education, and of community engagement. But we have this really big vision. We're trying to create a future where our coast has thriving communities, protective landscapes, and secure wildlife. So when we see something as hot a topic as data centers and their impacts and what they've been in other parts of the country, we really want to get ahead of the game and start to form a strategy about what that looks like for us. And so that's why you're here, and we're happy to share that information with you. But before we get into that, I kind of think it's good to just know kind of the frequently asked questions, the base of what we are kind of dealing with when we talk about data centers. So we're breaking it down into four webinars. It is a very nuanced issue. So you're in the first one right now. It's impacts in um, coastal Georgia, but with the lens of site and scale. So site where they're at, scale what size they are. Um, the July 14th webinar will look at ecological and resource impacts of data centers to coastal Georgia. The July 28th one will look at what can my community do about data centers, and I'll give more description on that. But all of the strategy components we will talk about throughout the full webinar series. And then the 11th, August 11th one, quality of life impacts on coastal Georgia residents. These are all really easy. They're all Tuesdays at noon. So just tune in or be sure to watch that recording that we'll provide in a follow-up email. So again, what are data centers? So data centers have been defined by the World Resource Institute as the physical infrastructure of the internet. They house the servers, the networking equipment, and supporting systems such as cooling, power backup, fire suppression, and security that keep digital services running reliably. So, what does that mean? So, they're basically warehouses that store information on network servers, sorry. They're used to hold data that make up the cloud that many of you utilize and have heard of. And these computers and hardwares have to be kept in very specific conditions to remain functional. And so data centers are kind of tied to that site-specific conditions that keep them able to run because they have to be able to run 24/7. Um, where can data centers be built? This is a question we hear all the time. Anywhere where sufficient infrastructure exists, they can be built. So if there is power, if there's electricity, if there is a landowner that wants to sell land, they can be built there. Sometimes includes investment in on-site power generation and on-site water, bringing water resources to that location. So there's lots of different ways they can be built, and there's a lot of nuances on how that property is developed. But we have tools on how local government approaches how they're built and where they're built based on zoning. So we'll talk more about that. Why would we build them in our community? So they're often sold to us or advertised to us as being increasing the tax revenue and leading to tax breaks for individual homeowners or property owners. They have the potential to attract other companies, other business, and broadly, if done correctly, they might be able to increase or create a more reliable local infrastructure through investments in water infrastructure and electricity infrastructure. So that's a big why would they build them to our community. We're going to talk about community benefit agreements later on in the series, but that's another option for holding a possible build out to something that will benefit the community. And then why now? The big one is why now? Speculation on increased AI usage is a big part of this. There is a build out to basically support the AI boom. Um, there's also increase in crypto mining, so the creation of digital currencies, which is very data heavy. So that's happening. Some data centers are specifically created just for crypto mining and actually don't hold any data outside or from any outside source. They're just looking for cryptocurrency. And we also broadly within the US and globally have been moving away from local processing power on your computer to being hosted offsite. And hosting this offsite data happens in data centers and happens on the cloud. So that's the big kind of questions that we're seeing, the who, what, when, where, why, how questions. And I'm going to actually toss it over to Hannah, and she's going to talk a little bit about how data centers get built and what that process looks like. So thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Eric. So when we were talking about data centers getting built, it unfortunately is a little more complicated than just a blanket statement. Every local government will have their own processes for how things get zoned or permitted from first application to actual build out. Generally speaking, though, a developer who is either the actual data center developer or wants to be kind of like a middleman to sell that property to a data center developer approaches a current landowner who lives in your community, might own many acres of land, or maybe they're looking to combine that land with other acres of land to create a larger parcel. But basically, they approach them, they buy the property from that landowner. From there, um, we actually have to consider what the parcel's zoned for. So most data centers are zoned for industrial. You'll see some of the much smaller ones that might be uh, zoned for like a heavy commercial or high commercial. Um, if the property is not already zoned industrial, which they typically aren't here in coastal Georgia, we don't have like a ton of parcels that are zoned industrial. And if we do, they are already built on. They're usually going to be some sort of rural land use. So whether that's agricultural or very low density residential. To be able to build a data center, they would have to zone it to industrial or, like I said, commercial. And so those very rare cases. And that's really based on the local government's zoning districts. We talked a bit about zoning in our Port Wentworth zone issues investigation that we did a few months ago. But the zoning process for data centers can get a little bit complicated. So if you have more questions, please let us know. I love talking about zoning. But from there, there's kind of a toss up locally between if they have to submit designs to get certain types of permits. But essentially, you go through permitting, designing, and approval by your local government, whether you had to get a rezone or not. Um, that would then lead into the construction, getting that energy and water procurement. So that's going to be actually how are you going to get the water to the data center to be able to cool it? How are you going to get energy to it? And then commissioning. So it starts to actually serve its purpose. So in the past, it's taken up to 3 years to actually get into that commissioning, but recently they've been much quicker, so 12 to 18 months. And they're expected to be in commission for, well, their structural lifespans can last a few decades. But as technology continues to evolve, it's currently unclear if the data centers that we're building right now will maintain its status as uh, like good enough, and if they'll actually be able to be retrofitted or keep up with that technology evolution. Go ahead, Eric. So what we're really here to talk about today is that siting and scale issue, right? When we talk about site selection, we're talking about where is the data center actually going to be built? On whose land? What does that land look like? What surrounds that land? In the past, data centers were typically built near cities because it was more beneficial for them to be in proximity to the headquarters or corporate headquarters or businesses or whoever that they served. And that like they had denser internet infrastructure, helped reduce any processing delays. But as land and energy costs in cities got more expensive, uh, companies began looking to more rural communities where our properties are cheaper. We have fewer regulations already about industrial uses in general, but specifically data centers. So you'll find that the majority of our local governments on the coast don't have any data center ordinances. Um, and then also the local governments tend to be eager to break some sort of deal with really high impact industry like a data center, whether that might be for tax revenues, or maybe they think that they could get updates to their infrastructure that the data center developer would pay for, whatever. Um, when we're talking about siting, there's a few things that here at 100 Miles we really want um, local governments and the public to consider. The first is a state wildlife action plan that was put out in 2025 by DNR. They did a beautiful, phenomenal job. And what I'm really highlighting today is this beautiful map of coastal Georgia. It's a little small on your screen. I'm so sorry. But it shows the opportunity areas of the hubs and the corridors for um, wildlife and habitats in coastal Georgia. These are opportunities for connectivity to strengthen the ecological resilience of coastal Georgia, protect any habitats that might be of special interest or threatened. Um, we don't want any sort of significant industrial site, let alone or particular data centers to be within any of these hubs or corridors, right? Another thing that we are really pushing to be considered is critical infrastructure. And so when we're talking about critical infrastructure, we're talking about two things, right? We're talking about the actual infrastructure for water and energy to be able to get to the data center. So you have to have access to that for your data center to run. There's been a lot of conversations about some of our more rural counties expanding natural gas to be able to support them. That is a significant cost, not only, but also having more non-renewable energy within coastal Georgia is not, the best option for our ecological health, our public health. Um, and then we're also talking about its location as like relative to hospitals or any sort of other critical services that um, rely on good energy access. We also are considering the siting relative to residences. Where do people live? Where are schools? Where are school children? Where are our more vulnerable communities? So maybe that's elderly, that's children, that's anyone who might be negatively infected by some of the concerns that the data centers have brought in other cities and states across the country for air pollution, noise pollution, things like that. And the last one is water availability. So Alice and Eric will touch on water availability way more in the next issues investigation. Alice is just such a expert on water, but when we're looking at a map of coastal Georgia, we have counties that are just red zones, do not have the availability to permit more water withdrawals. So that's another thing that we really have to consider when we're talking about siting these um, data centers. Go ahead, Eric. Yeah, I won't let me continue on myself. And then we're talking about siting vulnerabilities specifically for coastal Georgia. And so these are vulnerabilities not only to coastal Georgians, but to the data centers themselves. So why it might not be the best idea for them to take up residence in coastal Georgia. The first one is going to be our big one for, especially since we're in 2026 is hurricane season, hurricanes and flooding. 50%, 56% of all planned data centers in the US are already in locations of high risk of severe storms. About 23% of those are hurricane specific storms. Others are winter storms or earthquakes, things like that. We can't control hurricane season in coastal Georgia, but we can control how resilient our infrastructure and how prepared our communities are. So, investments in resilient infrastructure that protect residents first, like smarter water planning, more reliable means of transportation, reliable roads, resilient bridges that are resilient ways off of islands during of high wind events like hurricanes, better flood mapping, better access to broadband internet. All of that is incredibly important to do before we introduce a high impact development like a data center. We can only be as resilient as we prepare to be. We also have a pretty harsh climate here in Southeast Georgia. I don't know if you're aware of that. I'm sure you are. It's really hot outside. Um, we have a very hot and humid climate, and data centers further generate an enormous amount of heat. And poor locations for climates for data centers are going to be ones that are hot and humid. And they lead to an increase in energy and water demand that um, would be more significant than what they already would be, which is pretty harsh. The last one is saltwater exposure. And this is one that is going to be more exacerbated the closer to the actual coastline they are. But data centers would be negatively impacted by that saltwater exposure, that saltwater intrusion, but it would also potentially worsen any saltwater intrusion risk areas that we're already seeing here on the coast. It's already a conversation that so many of our industries here are having as well. Um, Go ahead to the next one, Eric. And then scale. Scale is such a fascinating thing to talk about when we are talking about data centers. It's so interesting. And you'll see the word hyperscale thrown around a lot. It doesn't have like a real legal technical definition. Some local governments will have ordinances that they define what a hyperscale data center is. IBM considers it anything above 5,000 servers. But you also have to realize that that includes miles of connection equipment. Typically, if we're talking about under roof square footage, so not the entire parcel, but under roof square footage, it's at least 20. Sometimes it'll say 10,000 square feet, but usually 20,000 square feet is where we start talking about like really big, high impact developments. And then something that a lot of people don't really consider about the scale of data centers is they have to have redundancy. So, and this is a really big deal for those data centers that are serving AI or crypto mining purposes. But redundancy really just means that they're providing backup measures or any devices that can kick in automatically should any power be lost or if there's any equipment failure. Data centers have to run 24/7. To be able to serve their purpose and what they've been developed for, they cannot have a down period. So redundancy is especially critical for these hyperscale data centers because they usually run automatically with very little human oversight or direct supervision, and they're running around the clock. So that redundancy takes up tons of space. So this image here is from the Microsoft Fairwater 2 in Fayetteville, Georgia, out in the Atlanta area. Fayetteville, Georgia, excuse me. It is, as far as I know, the biggest actually built data center in Georgia. But what does that really look like? And you can see in the picture too, um, all of the infrastructure that is outside of that actual square footage of the building. So when we're talking about that square footage, it's just considered what's under the roof, not all of the um, instruments that are used for that redundancy. Go ahead to the next slide, Eric. So let's kind of think about this scale in more relative terms that we can, you know, think of more tangibly. So if we're talking about Microsoft Fairweather 2, it's 350 megawatts. Uh, but if we're talking about scale, it's about 1.2 million square feet. Again, that's under roof. And then the acre campus is 315. I've compared it to a few things that you might be more familiar with. And these comparisons are just for that 1.2 million square feet. If you want to compare it to the acre campus, times it by about 15, and you'll get a better um, alignment. So that's about 7 Walmart supercenters. That's about 21 regulation football fields. And that's about 16 of my local Buc-ee's, the Brunswick Buc-ee's. 16 of the buildings for Buc-ee's would equal one of the buildings for this data center. Again, not including that redundancy and not the rest of that campus. It's a significant um, footprint on these parcels. And we're thinking about all of this land that has to be dedicated to these industries that are not, when we're talking about other industries in coastal Georgia, those are significant job providers. Um, and we don't see that after construction for these data centers, right? Go ahead, Eric. So you might have seen that our messaging around data centers lately has been press pause. If you have seen Kat or Jeff out in the community, they might have given you one of these really cool stickers that say protect our coasts, press pause on data centers. What does that actually mean? That means that we are asking for our local governments to consider moratoriums. Moratoriums are temporary suspension of specific government actions during a specified time period. There's two really important things in that. One, it's temporary. It will end. And in fact, the second most important thing is that we know exactly when it will end. They can be extended if they feel like the purpose of the moratorium wasn't met during the actual moratorium period. Um, and it also gives us time, right? So coastal Georgians need to better understand data centers and AI and what that means for coastal Georgia, what that means for Georgia, what that means for the United States, right? We need to better understand how these data centers can impact us, how our use of AI will impact us. It also gives us an opportunity for engagement. So doing a moratorium allows local elected officials and staff for local governments to have more transparent, open conversations. A great example recently has been on the other side of the border in Nassau County, Florida. They've been doing a fact-finding committee during their moratorium to help them make sure that they're well educated on the impacts, but also how they can use that education to better protect them. So, and in two issues investigations, you'll hear from Kat and Jeff, and in the last issues investigation, we'll talk more about kind of ordinances and what those actual like pathways look like. So you'll hear more information about that if you stay tuned. And then lastly, yeah, you'll be able to set up protections and ordinances to ensure that data centers can be good neighbors. We do have a data center model ordinance on our website that Eric will give you a wonderful tour of in just a few minutes. That shows how these ordinances can be protective of not only land, but of people and of our resources and of our wildlife. It takes into account that swap map that I showed you a few slides ago. It shows that there are ways that we can allow um, very thoughtfully and with restrictions and regulations, data centers to be able to come to our coast, but while still giving a certain level of transparency and being able to be better neighbors and be able to reap the full benefits of what they are saying that they're promising, right? Um, but that's really it from me, Eric, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for that great summary. Just to go through again what Hannah was walking through with the webinar schedule. So, our next webinar is going to be with me and Alice Keyes, who is our senior conservation strategist, and we'll do a deep dive on the coastal impacts, on ecological impacts, but the impacts on the resources with a focus on water and energy. impacts. July 28th, we're going to have talking about our developed strategy that can be employed by your community. So, what can my community do? We'll learn more about the steps you can take to make sure that your community has a seat at the table. And we'll also include local updates from our coastal advocates that have been dealing with data centers and data center development, what that looks like in their specific communities and the communities they work in. And then on August 11th, we're going to talk about the quality of life impacts, the kind of the human impacts of data centers and what that could look like for coastal Georgia residents. And we're thinking about that as like, what is the true cost of data centers to the people that live around them by exploring some case studies from around the country, but also the Atlanta area, which is the second largest data center market in the US. Kind of crazy to think that it's kind of in our backyard, so to speak. You may be joining us from Atlanta, so thank you for joining us from there while we talk about this coastal issue that is countrywide and statewide for sure. So that's kind of a look at the schedule and those subjects that are upcoming. We do always want to have an action component to our issues investigation, try to empower you. So Hannah mentioned our ordinances. This is just a screenshot, but I'm going to click through and it should take us directly to our website, which is really great. So if you go to 100miles.org/data centers or follow the link in the follow-up email, you'll be able to access this site, which, as we talked about, covers a lot of the information we've gone over today, but is the place where our OHM model ordinance lives, which is a guide for how your local community can ask local governments to interact with data centers in positive ways through adopting these ordinances. As Hannah mentioned, many do not have a single thing on the books in regard to data centers. They are that new of a use, and especially these hyperscale, these large data centers are so new that many communities aren't prepared for them. We have a pretty cool map from our good friends at Science for Georgia, all about kind of where data centers are popping up, where it looks like there are possibilities of data centers being built out. There's conversations being had. We have some really good talk on kind of why data centers might not be the best fit for the coast. That has to do with the site and the scale that we talked about. But those energy demand, the high water needs, the large footprint that we just learned about, noise and air quality, which we'll talk about in later webinars, and then that thing we're trying to fight against, which is the lack of transparency and public input. That Nassau County example as being, a thing that we hope to initiate and get behind in our local communities if they're considering data centers. It also has kind of a brief overview of the legislator, what happened within our state. There were Senate bills and House bills and a new bill, it seemed like every day, but nothing really made a ton of movement, and there was no real meaningful legislation that was adopted in regards to data centers. There will be more starting in January. So we will be on the lookout for those and be engaging in that way. We have an advocate we have someone from our staff up in Atlanta during the session every week. So we will keep our ear to the ground in that way. We have, as a country, not had a lot of states specifically adopt statewide legislation. So there is a possibility for Georgia to be groundbreaking in that sort of way. Virginia and Georgia, as you said, are two of those big markets. So it makes sense that we would have a statewide plan for data centers. And then we've got some local community stories on this page, as well as a bunch of resources from partners, and then some more frequently asked questions, organizations that are also engaging in that fight in regard to thinking about how to press pause and how data centers can be good neighbors and what it looks like for data centers to be held accountable and be beneficial to the areas that they're going to be directly affecting. And then we have hundreds of local stories, some of which are highlighted in the news, many statewide stories, many national stories to look at. If you want to learn more, there's good links through here. As you can see, a lot. And then as soon as we get our recording made of this and packaged, that will also live on this page as well too, as well as a link to register for the rest of our issue investigations in this series. We are so um, excited for you all to have joined us. We are going to do a little bit of some housekeeping here at the end. I forgot I was going to do that. I did that in practice. Let's do it with the era. There we go. So, one of the housekeeping things, one of the resources we always want to highlight is that OHM is here to support you all. It's here to support communities and individuals and the things that they care about and passionate about, the ways that your environment and your livelihood is infected by these things. So, what we want to do is for you to reach out. So, we're a small team. Knowing one of us means being connected to all of us. And you know me and you know Hannah. So, I drop my information here. This QR code right here also creates a direct email to me. If you have any questions you don't want to put out into this format, please do reach out for collaboration in that sort of way. We welcome that. We also would like to let you know that if you're viewing in a third party or if you're two people on a single screen viewing and you might not be able to see the rest of the series, please do register. This QR code will take you to the registration for our webinar series, and that will, if you're registered through our website, allow you to have access to all those resources we mentioned in that follow-up email, which will be coming. So please do register if you have not yet, and I'll leave this up for a few more seconds. Um, the other thing I will say is that we have some questions out there, but if you would like to, please now start dropping questions into the Q&A portion of the Zoom or drop them in the comment section, and we will have a staff member move those over this way. I do see some already. So without further ado, we're going to jump into questions, but because I think it's good to see our faces, I'm going to stop the share. Awesome. And what I would like to do is just jump right into a question. 1 second. So a user asked about the community benefits agreements and if they are materializing for communities where data centers are being built and what that looks like. We have seen some materializing. We've also seen the exact opposite in that we have site plans that are developed. We have things that are said by data centers, and then there's some backtracking. There's movement away from closed loop technology. There's movement away from on-site water being drawn on site to using city infrastructure. So all of those things are possible to change. What we will say is that data centers do look towards being as efficient as possible. And with that efficiency, we're seeing some data centers plan towards automation completely, meaning they're what they call a lights off facility. There would be no or very few people working at the data center. They would basically be these large buildings that don't have people in them. And so what we worry about is community benefits are jobs, community benefits are tax breaks, but if they lower property values and if they don't create jobs, that's a real problem. So thinking about the value of community benefit agreements for that is really important, and getting those written into and part of the ordinance adoption process is really important. Hannah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think you covered that great, Eric.
Cool. The other one that I think is kind of for me one of the big questions and a question that we've seen a lot has been does my individual AI use drive data center development? And I think that's a really nuanced question, or maybe a nuanced answer, because the answer is yes and no. The answer is that my AI use supports the creation of data centers because I'm supporting the AI industry and I'm supporting that build out of AI tools and large language models, which use a lot of data and which need support through data centers. What I will say is that the speculation of building these is based on AI being adopted and being extremely widespread. And so that speculation of building out these data centers to support it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a broad AI adoption. And if someone uses AI for their job but finds that it isn't really working for them and isn't supportive and isn't a tool that they want to use, I mean, think about it as a tool, right? Then that speculation doesn't take that into account. That speculation is completely based on everyone adopting so that they have the best tools so these large language models can be trained up so they can, support users. And so if you choose to not support AI, that effect is felt. If you um, are choosing to be against data centers, that is felt by the AI industry as well. And I think that's hopefully that answers that question as well too. So it's both yes and no. Um, your individual use is a tiny, tiny drop in the larger bucket of the data center speculation around what is being used to create this massive amount of infrastructure build out. Yeah. And then I think another good one, Hannah, we have here is how will I know a data center is coming to my community? And I think that you are a great person to answer that question.
Yeah, so your first step is really actually knowing if you have any sort of ordinance within your community for data centers. They have been so publicized lately that you do probably already know if your community has adopted a data center ordinance. Um, I do want to actually mention real quick that the reason that I so strongly support these local governments having good, strong ordinances as opposed to no ordinance at all is because as a planner, I have seen some of the legal loopholes that some developers can get into to try to get a development that might not very specifically be outlined. So just because right now your community is doesn't have a data center as an allowable use, there might be some sort of legal loophole or shenanigans that they might try to pull to get it approved by your board of commissioners. So it's great to have an actual ordinance that is protective and is good. And then to actually know if one's coming, again, the property very likely needs to be rezoned, unless it's already going on, in a rare case, a property that already is appropriately zoned for a data center. All rezonings have to follow some state laws that require a certain level of public acknowledgement and public engagement from the local government. So they will have to put out these bright yellowy orange signs in front of the parcel that the data center would go into. Now, a lot of these data centers are going to be in fairly rural, low development areas. So if you see one, you need to post it on Facebook or tell your neighbors. This is one of the really positive things that I feel like data centers have done recently is bring people together in a way that has been unprecedented for honestly since I think like 2020. Um, so they'll have these big bright signs out, and then any adjacent properties will get a letter saying that this property that is near your property is going to be rezoned to industrial or whatever. And on this day, you can go to the Board of County Commission and you can talk about how you feel about it. That is the best way to know. Again, please continue talking to other community members. Stay in touch with us as well. We can try to help as much as we can. Word of mouth we've seen has been so significant in getting people at these meetings, getting people in the know. But those are kind of the telltale signs of how you'll know that a data center is being considered in your community. If they do not have to go through a rezoning, um, that is a little bit more difficult. I would hope that they still need to go through some sort of special use that your local government needs to consider at a Board of County Commissions meeting. So that's a little bit more difficult. But again, uh, if your neighbor says, "Oh, I know this person," and they uh, think that they're clear cutting for a very large industrial development soon, look into it and let us know, and we can try and help as well.
Yeah, and I will just add to that that our kind of engagement strategy is that we have coastal advocates. We have one for North Coast, Mid Coast, and South Coast. Those individuals are at those meetings, and so they're keeping an ear to the ground. They have contacts within the community, and we always try to publicize those engagement points if we know something is happening through our action alerts. So you can sign up for those. That ability to do that will be highlighted in that follow-up email as well too that you will receive if you were registered or if you shared your email with us. So thank you for that. A question coming through is, does the swap have any legal weight for fighting against data center development that would put the swap or wildlife in harm's way? Um,
I don't go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to say, Eric?
no,
Okay.
that's all you.
I don't I don't believe that the swap specifically has any legal weight for, the swap map for conservation opportunity areas is not you cannot build here. Now, some of those areas obviously have overlap with like the Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge and, all of are already protected areas. But no, I don't believe that there's any legal weight. I can double check that if you want to send Eric a follow-up to your question, but I don't believe that there's any sort of like legal ramifications that the swap itself has. It's kind of just these are areas that we've identified as opportunities for conservation that would, strengthen ecological connectivity. Uh, there obviously are always some sort of considerations for habitats that are specifically identified as endangered. Usually that's already been identified and protected, but if that is a concern that you are having with the area that has been earmarked for development, please let one of our advocates know.
Yeah. Another question that's come across has been for a moratorium, how long is long enough for effective action and things to be put in place for when the moratorium ends? So, what does that
Mhm.
time frame look like? I'll let
Mhm.
you speak to that, Hannah.
So for moratoriums, you have to remember that the intention should be that you're using this time to figure things out, right? We're going to get educated. We're going to figure out and when I say we, I mean the local government. The local government's going to get educated. They're going to take that time to try to develop some legal precedent or ordinances to actually be able to have something that addresses data centers. They don't have to do that. And so if your community has recently adopted a moratorium, make sure that you are trying to stay engaged with what are you doing, asking those questions of how can this be more transparent? How can more public members be engaged? If we're going to put a timeline on it, I think a year, honestly. I don't think that this is a situation that should be rushed. I also think a lot can happen in a year. We will have, if you start a year from now, we'll have a full legislative session. We'll have, honestly, an election. I mean, there's a lot that happens in a year and a lot of new information that comes out, not only about data centers, but about, AI use in general. Um, it is definitely an exploratory period, and they should be treating it that way. If you're going to just have a year and do nothing, then, you know, that's not great. I'd rather you have 3 months and do a ton than have a year and do nothing. But that, comes down to, you know,
Yeah. I completely agree, and I think what I will also add to that is that many of these commissions are meeting their meeting frequency is very small. So, 3 months might only be three meetings. That might be definitely not enough time to look into all of this unless they're doing outside work on data centers, which is um, a lot to ask because of this is a very much, like Hannah said, an emergent issue and very nuanced, but also a lot to ask because there's a lot of other business going on as well too. So we do
I'll,
want to, yeah,
Eric, if I can add one more thing to that, I'll also say that a lot of our um, smaller communities don't have all of the staff capacity and resources to be able to spend 24/7 trying to figure this out within just 3 months. So that also gives our staff members in our local governments, our planners, our engineers, our building and code enforcement more time to try to figure out how this could work for their communities as well.
yeah, and it, of course, gives the opportunity for the community to engage, which if they don't have the resources, think of the community as a resource as well too, and create a committee in that sort of way. So awesome, thank you. And then we do have another one. So it says in Port Wentworth, we are promoting a petition to pause data centers. Any data on efficacy of that approach? So the petition approach.
Hmm. Um, I do have like a question that I know they can't really answer. But is it like a referendum type petition? I don't believe so because I feel like I would have
Yeah, I think we would have heard of
been
that.
more, I would
That
have known about it.
yeah.
But that's a really
Uh,
big deal. And a petition to pause data centers. I know there have been some in Georgia in particular. I know there've definitely been some in other states. I know there's one in Tennessee right now for the data center that they want to put next to the zoo. Um, I will say that any sort of come together unified engagement is always going to be great. I can't really speak to the actual efficacy because it really depends on how seriously your local government is taking community feedback. I don't think that it is a approach like in vain or anything. I think it's amazing. Keep on keeping on. You have anything to add to that, Eric?
yeah, well, I will just say that, it is 100 mile stance that local government should be representative of the communities that they serve. And if local government isn't listening to a broad petition that has a lot of support, then they aren't doing their job and they are elected officials, and that is a shame. So when we think about how we interact, if community involvement means there is a sizable population that is vocal and they don't want it in their community, then local government should be listening to those voices. And we have lots of trainings and lots of local experience on how to best do that. I do trainings on how to be a good advocate and how to be best heard by your representatives. And I would invite you to reach out to me for those resources and for a training if you're interested. I know you probably know our North Coast advocate Jeff. Jeff and I could do something in your area for sure. We do want always to advocate through community engagement and have your voices be heard. So, um, other than that, I don't see any other questions popping up. I'll do a last call, I guess, for questions if you want to drop them in the Q&A. I think otherwise, we just want to say a final thank you. Again, the resources that we mentioned today, all the things that we've been talking about, will be available to you in a follow-up email if you registered. So that follow-up email will include this presentation. It will include the recorded video. It will include links to our data center page, where you can see the model ordinance, and it will include kind of a breakdown of that schedule of webinars that are upcoming. We do hope that you join us as we learn more and learn together. A challenge for me is to bring someone to the next webinar. Bring a question that you have, bring someone to the next webinar. We'd love to have this information out and as widespread as possible. So if you can help us in that way, we would really appreciate it. So a final thank you and have a good rest of your afternoon. Um, and stay cool, y'all.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Bye bye, all.